The junkyard woke under a pale, breathless dawn, fog nesting between rows of rusting fenders like forgotten blankets. Daniel, 30, underfed, hair long and matted, a patchy beard shadowing tired cheeks, picked his way through the hulks with his dog, Rusty. The mutt's ribs showed, but his eyes were bright. Cans, wire, bottles, anything tradable were their plan, same as yesterday. Daniel's shoes split at the toes. His jacket smelled of rain and time. Still, Rusty trotted as if each step meant promise, and Daniel matched him, because hope sometimes borrows a leash. They favored the back lots, where the earth turned to clay and weeds reclaimed rubber. It was quiet there, no yard hands, no cutters, just the metallic hush of sleeping engines. Rusty's ears tipped forward, his whole body stiffening into a single question. He snuffed once, twice, then broke into a short, urgent bark that bounced off windshields and died. Daniel stilled. The dog didn't weigh sound. "Easy, boy," he murmured, eyes tracing the maze. Rusty was already moving, a brown arrow threading gaps toward a dull black sedan with a roof dented like a knuckle. The car was nothing special. Oxidized paint, greasy fingerprints fossilized by sun, a trunk lid that didn't quite sit flush. Rusty planted his paws and scratched at the seam, whining from somewhere deep. Daniel pressed his ear to the cold metal. At first, only his own breath came back. Then, a thin, muffled sound found him half groan, half plea, swallowed by steel. He jerked back, heart punching. He pressed again. The sound repeated, faint but human. Fear moved in behind his ribs. Curiosity refused to yield ground. Rusty's eyes held him to the spot. "Now, do something." Daniel's fingers found a crowbar wedged under a bumper, its paint worn to silver. He wedged the tip into the trunk's lip and leaned. Metal shrieked, rainwater spilled, rust flaked like old snow. The lid grudged an inch, then another. The lock tore with a sound he'd feel in his teeth later. The trunk sprang and bounced. Daniel caught it with his shoulder and lifted. For a heartbeat, he saw only plastic liner and a coil of rope. Then a face rose into the dawn's thin light, eyes wide and glassy, tape crisscrossing a mouth gone bloodless. She was young, 25 at most, wrists bound tight, ankles lashed, hair stuck to her cheeks in damp streaks. The expensive cut of her dress had become evidence: torn fabric, scraped silk, dirt ground into seams. Her eyes locked on Daniel, hunted and pleading. Rusty rose on hind legs, paws on the bumper, whining. Daniel slid the bar free, hands shaking, and peeled back tape with slowness learned from pain. The adhesive pulled skin. She winced, but didn't fight him. Air rushed from her chest in a single broken sob when the tape came away. "Please," she rasped. "Help me." "Hold still," he said, voice barely above a breath. The knots were brutal, jerked tight by hands that didn't plan to return. He dug nails under coarse rope, found an angle, twisted. The first loop surrendered. Her wrists trembled, skin raw where fibers had chewed. Rusty nosed her elbow, tail low, his own version of "don't go." "It's all right," Daniel murmured, not knowing if he was convincing her or himself. He worked the last knot free and eased an arm around her shoulders. She tried to sit, failed, and folded against him without apology, ribs hitching against his palm like cracked bellows. "They left me," she said, voice shredded. "They said they'd be back." Fear found his spine, cold and precise. Who? She shook her head, a staccato of no time. We have to go. Daniel glanced down the lane. Nothing moving, only the long stare of headlight glass. He looped an arm under her knees, but her wince told him carrying would punish more than help. Lean on me, he said instead. She did, fingers catching his torn lapel. Rusty hopped off the bumper, circling to flank them, every line of him set to guard. They made it 3 cars before her legs insisted on stopping. A busted chair beside a strip pickup offered half rest. She sank, hands clasped to her ribs, breath in ragged counts. Daniel scanned what the night had missed, even ruined. Everything she wore told a story watch with a diamond's whisper, dress with stitches that didn't come from a mall. She wasn't lost. She'd been taken. He crouched to her eye line. What happened? She swallowed, fought her way to words. Kidnapped. Ransom. They got spooked. Hid me here. The last syllable collapsed. Rusty pressed his head into her knee, anchoring. What's your name? Daniel asked softly. She hesitated, as if names had weight that might crush her. Sophia. He nodded once. Daniel and Rusty. The dog's tail swept the dirt, a brief flag of normalcy in a place that had forgotten the word. She had the look of someone accustomed to decisions, and this moment had stripped her to a single one. Live or don't. Her gaze flicked to Rusty, then back to Daniel, puzzlement creasing the fear. She seemed to be recalibrating wealth-measured instincts, negotiating with a stranger who smelled of rain and road. Cold reached through her torn dress. Without ceremony, Daniel shrugged off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. It carried a street's map, smoke, wet cardboard, the faint bitter of cheap coffee. She pulled it close like privilege had never taught her not to. Why are you helping me? The honest question of a world that had taught her everything has a price. Daniel let a corner of a smile happen. Because no one else is here, he didn't add, and because once someone had pulled me out of a dark and I want the universe to balance someday. Sound slid through the aisles, gravel under boots, a laugh sandblasted to cruelty by distance. Sophia's fingers tightened on his sleeve until the fabric answered. Rusty's growl grew low and even a string plucked and held. Daniel's shoulders hardened. They're back, she whispered, color draining. Then we move, he said, already rising. He pulled her upright, waited until her balance remembered her, then let her weight settle against him in the way that wouldn't break either of them. Rusty trotted ahead, then stopped, glancing back, mapping the turns he'd take if fear belonged to someone else. They threaded the lanes of metal bones, a Buick rib cage, a Ford spine, a hood propped like a broken wing. Sophia stumbled, not from clumsiness, but from spent batteries. Daniel adjusted his pace to hers, breath shallow to keep sound small. Voices behind them sharpened, shaped into words that hated. Find it. Check the black sedan. Not her, not a person. A package gone inconvenient. Rusty angled right, ears triangulating, and Daniel followed with blind faith you save for animals and tides. Hands that tore knuckles last winter now steadied a stranger's steps like they'd rehearsed. The fence, when they found it, was tired enough to pity them. Bent diamond mesh slumped into weeds, a gap gnashed by time. Daniel parted it, thorns nicking his wrist, and pushed Sophia through. Her breath caught on a cut. She didn't complain. Rusty slipped like water. Daniel followed last, letting the wire bite his jacket instead of her skin. On the far side, the world widened into an empty lot, and a sky trying out blue. They folded down near a stack of pallets, lungs insisting on thunder. The voices faded to guesses. The wind argued them into silence. Sophia tilted her head back against the wood, eyes closed, the jacket drawn tight like a spell. "Thank you," she whispered, making the words sound expensive. Daniel let the compliment pass over him like rain. Rusty scooted close to her hip and exhaled as if he'd personally ended the emergency. Daniel watched the yard's horizon. Doing nothing had always been safer than choosing. But opening that trunk had turned him into someone making choices again, and the gravity of that pressed his ribs from inside. The lot felt exposed. The city beyond it felt like both problem and cure. "We need a phone," he said. "Hospital. Police." Sophia flinched at the last word, not from guilt, but from math. "They'll watch everything official," she said. "They'll be listening for my name." It wasn't paranoia. It was policy when ransoms are drafted by men who count commas. Daniel's jaw worked. A homeless man calling the police with a bruised rich girl beside him wasn't a headline that ended clean. He looked at Rusty, who looked back like, "Pick a heading, I'll walk." "There's a church 2 blocks east," Daniel said. "They'll let me use the phone sometimes." They moved again, shorter, shabbier. Now, no longer fugitives, just 3 figures the city had trained itself to ignore. Daniel kept Sophia between himself and traffic, using his body to edit the world down to safe lanes. Rusty scouted corners as if he'd been born to it, which maybe he had. They reached the church door with its paint blistered into saints and knocked in a rhythm you learn when your requests are small. A volunteer with flour on her forearms cracked it and blinked at the bundle of trouble. "Please," Daniel said, voice carrying both apology and need. "We need help." Inside smelled like soup and hymnals. They tucked into a side office where the phone was an older model that rang like a memory. Daniel dialed with hands that could remember numbers even after they forgot birthdays. He kept it simple. An anonymous tip, a location for a wrecked car, a suggestion to check the trunk anyway. He didn't say kidnapping. He said hurt. When he hung up, the room's quiet returned with a sigh. Sophia watched him, not with gratitude now, but with a dawning, startled respect, as if recalibrating every story she'd learned about men like him. A volunteer brought gauze and a bottle labeled more antiseptic than anyone enjoys. Daniel cleaned the worst scrapes on Sophia's wrists with the hesitance of someone who knows pain intimately and doesn't want to gift it. She didn't flinch more than honesty required. Rusty nosed the trash can, found nothing noble, and settled at the door as if employed. "I'm Sophia Hale," she said finally, the name stepping into the room like it expected a chair. The volunteer's eyes widened by a city's worth. Daniel blinked too. He knew the billboards. He knew the app she'd built that paid for Sky. Sophia looked almost ashamed of the syllables. "I thought money made me safe," she said. "Half to Daniel, half to the carpet. Turns out it makes you visible." Daniel folded gauze corners with a mechanic's precision. "Turns out staying makes you real," he said, surprising himself with the sentence. She watched his hands knot the wrap. "Why did you stay?" Daniel glanced at Rusty. "He found you." I followed. It wasn't false modesty. It was his hierarchy. She looked at the dog with something like wonder. "Thank you, Rusty." The tail thumped once. "You're welcome, citizen." Sirens ghosted past outside, not stopping, just moving sound through air. The church grew busy with the small chores that keep mercy upright ladles, mops, a laugh that patched a hole in quiet. Daniel felt the old itch to move on before his luck expired. Sophia watched that thought cross his face and, for the first time, reached for him, not to be steadied, but to anchor. "Don't disappear," she said. "Not yet." The request held no command and all the gravity in the world. He nodded once, as if agreeing with weather, and the room expanded to include tomorrow. When they finally stepped back into daylight, the yard was a rumor behind them, and the city had shifted into its late morning key. Sophia wore Daniel's jacket like a flag no one recognized, and Daniel walked a half step off her shoulder like a bodyguard nobody hired. Rusty chose the middle, the true diplomat's place. They didn't know if the men had given up, if the police were a net or a sieve, if this next turn would return them to shadows. They only knew the trunk was open, and that once opened, some doors don't close. Something had begun. They crossed a small park where kids argued rules they'd invented and a sprinkler stitched diamonds into grass. Sophia stopped at a bench, breath catching, not from fear now, but from the weight of living when you've been near not. "You saved me," she said again, as if repetition might render it ordinary. Daniel shook his head. "We saved each other." He meant it. He had woken to scavenging and was ending the morning as a witness who stayed. Rusty jumped up beside them, leaned his warm shoulder into both, and sighed, the sound that means, "We are, for a moment, safe." Sophia turned the watch on her wrist, scratched, still ticking, and laughed once, startled by the noise. "I can replace everything but this morning," she said. "I don't want to." Daniel studied the street, then her, then the sky doing its best. "Then we keep it," he said. "We decide what it becomes." She looked like someone who hadn't considered ordinary as an option in a long time. The day flexed around them, ready for the next page. Rusty hopped down, nose to the wind, and led them forward, as if he already knew where this kind of story goes. Sophia leaned heavily on Daniel as they left the church and stepped into the streets. Her body trembled, but her eyes were sharper now, filled with both fear and determination. Daniel kept glancing around, scanning alleys and corners, ready for danger. Rusty trotted ahead, ears flicking at every sound. Sophia whispered, "They'll be looking for me. They won't stop." Daniel tightened his grip on her arm. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you." The words surprised even him. For years, he had lived with no one to protect but himself and his dog. Now, everything had changed overnight. Sophia's breathing steadied as they walked, though every step seemed to pull her further from the world she once knew. Daniel guided her to a small park bench hidden by trees, letting her sit while Rusty guarded their side. "Why me?" Daniel asked softly. "Why did they take you?" Sophia stared at the ground, tears threatening. "Because of money. Because my family's company makes enemies." She looked up at him, voice shaking. "They thought ransom would break me." Daniel's chest tightened. He had no wealth, no power, yet sitting beside her, he felt like he carried the weight of her survival. The silence stretched, broken only by Rusty's quiet panting. Then Sophia spoke again, softer this time. "Why did you help me? You could have left me there." Daniel glanced at her, his eyes tired but honest. "Because someone had to, and because I know what it feels like to be left behind." Sophia studied his face, seeing more than just a scruffy beard and worn clothes. There was pain there, but also strength, the kind built through years of hardship. She realized he wasn't just her rescuer. He was a man who understood loneliness better than anyone she'd ever met. Hours passed before Sophia convinced Daniel to help her reach the edge of the city. "I can't go to the police yet," she insisted. "I don't know who I can trust." Daniel frowned, but nodded. They moved carefully through side streets, keeping to the shadows. Rusty's instincts proved invaluable, barking softly whenever someone suspicious drew near. At one point, a black SUV rolled past, windows tinted. Sophia gripped Daniel's hand, breath catching. "That's them." Daniel pulled her into an alley, shielding her with his own body. Rusty growled low until the car disappeared. Only then did Sophia breathe again. They found refuge in an abandoned warehouse, its broken windows covered with boards. Inside, it was dusty and cold, but safe enough for the moment. Daniel helped Sophia sit on a pile of old blankets, then knelt beside her. "You should rest." She shook her head. "I can't. What if they find us?" Daniel reached for her trembling hands, steadying them. "Then I'll stop them." She blinked at him, surprised by his certainty. Rusty curled up at her feet, tail brushing against her legs like a silent promise. For the first time, Sophia let herself believe she wasn't alone anymore. As night fell, Sophia asked Daniel about his life. At first, he resisted, uncomfortable with the attention, but her eyes, curious, gentle, despite exhaustion, pulled words from him. He spoke of his construction job, the accident that ended it, the bills that buried him, the family he lost contact with. "I didn't mean to end up like this," he admitted quietly. "But once you fall, the world doesn't give you a hand up." Sophia listened intently, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time, she saw homelessness not as failure, but as a story written by cruel circumstances. Daniel's humanity shone through. In return, Sophia shared her own burdens. She spoke of her parents' empire, of expectations that crushed her, of being paraded as an heir before she was ready. "People think being rich makes you untouchable," she whispered, "but it only makes you a bigger target." Daniel watched her, recognizing the loneliness in her confession. They were from opposite worlds, yet their pain was strangely alike. Two broken souls, thrown together by fate. Rusty lifted his head, sensing the connection between them, and wagged his tail approvingly. In the quiet warehouse, an unexpected bond began to form, fragile but undeniable. Suddenly, the distant rumble of engines shattered the silence. Daniel stiffened, pulling Sophia closer. Rusty barked, ears sharp. Lights flashed through the cracks in the boarded windows. "They found us," Sophia whispered, terror returning. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't fight them, but he could protect her. He grabbed her hand. "This way." They slipped through a back door, Rusty leading. The night air bit cold against their skin as they ran through the alleys. Behind them, shouts echoed. Daniel pushed Sophia forward, his heart pounding. For the first time in years, he wasn't running from his own demons. He was running for someone else's life. They stumbled into a train yard, hiding between two rusted freight cars. The sound of boots followed, growing louder. Sophia's body trembled as she clutched Daniel's sleeve. "We can't keep running," she whispered. Daniel looked around, then pointed to a half-open car. "In there." He helped her climb inside, Rusty jumping after. They crouched in the shadows, holding their breath as footsteps passed nearby. Sophia pressed her forehead against Daniel's shoulder, eyes shut tight. For a moment, he wrapped an arm around her, steadying her fear. The intimacy startled them both, but neither pulled away. Together, they waited in silence. When the danger passed, Sophia exhaled shakily. You saved me again, she whispered. Daniel shook his head. Rusty saved us. I just followed. She smiled faintly, brushing her hand against the dog's fur. Then I owe you both. For a woman who had once lived in mansions and boardrooms, sitting in an abandoned train car with a homeless man and his dog seemed surreal, yet she felt safer here than she had in years. Daniel didn't see her as a CEO or a prize. He saw her as human, and that, she realized, was something money could never buy. The next morning, sunlight streamed through cracks in the train car. Daniel woke first, stretching stiff muscles. Sophia stirred beside him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder. For a brief moment, he let himself imagine a life different from the one he knew, a life where he wasn't invisible. Rusty nudged him, breaking the thought. Sophia opened her eyes, meeting Daniel's gaze. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled faintly. You don't have to keep saying that. She shook her head. No, I do, because no one's ever risked this much for me before. Daniel's heart tightened. He had no answer. As they prepared to move again, Sophia asked, What do you want, Daniel? If you could have anything. He hesitated. No one had asked him that in years. Finally, he said, a place where I belong. That's all. She nodded slowly, her eyes soft. You deserve that. For the first time, she wasn't looking at him like a stranger from the streets. She was looking at him like someone who mattered. Rusty barked once, as if sealing the promise. Daniel glanced at Sophia, and for the first time in years, hope flickered in his chest. Maybe belonging wasn't impossible after all. Sophia's phone had been destroyed by her captors, but she remembered a safe contact, an old friend she trusted more than her own board of directors. Daniel agreed to take her to the address she gave. They traveled carefully, avoiding crowded streets, Rusty always scouting ahead. Sophia leaned on Daniel often, not just for balance, but for comfort. Each step together built trust, something neither expected. When they finally reached the address, a modest townhouse, Sophia's friend opened the door with wide eyes. Sophia, my God, what happened? Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, I'll explain. But he saved me. She pointed to Daniel. Her friend hurried them inside, locking the door. Warmth flooded the small living room, and Sophia nearly collapsed onto the couch. Daniel remained standing, feeling out of place among neat furniture and glowing lamps. Rusty curled by his feet, sensing his unease. Sophia reached for Daniel's hand. Stay, please. Her friend looked between them, puzzled but grateful. Who are you? She asked Daniel. He hesitated, then simply said, Someone who found her when she needed it. Sophia tightened her grip. Someone who saved my life. For the first time, Daniel didn't feel like an outsider. For once, he belonged in the room. Over the next hours, Sophia rested while Daniel kept watch. Her friend prepared food, soup, and bread. Daniel shared every bite with Rusty before taking his own. The warmth filled him more than he expected, reminding him of a lifelong lost. Sophia woke briefly, smiling at the sight of him. You fit here, she whispered sleepily. Daniel looked away, uncomfortable with the idea. But inside, a small part of him wanted to believe her. For years, he had thought his story was over. Now, sitting in a stranger's home beside a woman whose life he had saved, a new chapter waited. By evening, Sophia's friend insisted they contact someone she trusted in law enforcement. Daniel agreed reluctantly, fearing exposure, but Sophia assured him it was necessary. They'll keep coming unless we stop them, she said firmly. Daniel admired the steel in her voice, strength returning beneath the bruises. Rusty wagged his tail, as if sensing victory. Together, they began planning their next steps. For the first time, Daniel wasn't just surviving, he was fighting for something bigger. He looked at Sophia, who met his gaze with quiet gratitude. Fate had thrown them together, and neither could deny their lives were forever changed.